They have been two of the most intense manhunts in history. One, the search for Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. The other, the hunt for Osama bin Laden, leader of the Al-Qaeda terrorist network. In trying to track them down, the U.S. has used everything in its arsenal, from the world's most sophisticated spy satellite network to special ops task forces, to the lure of the biggest cash reward in history, a cool $25 million per man. In the end, though, it wasn't the reward for Saddam Hussein that did the trick. It was information from an insider nabbed by U.S. forces that led to Saddam's capture.
The key event was the capture of an individual who was known to play a direct role in supporting Saddam Hussein. His cooperation was critical. In all these operations, you have to have some luck. Call this the lucky stroke.
Originally, it was Task Force 20, a highly classified special operations force that was given the job of tracking down Saddam. In the 8-month hunt for him, there were some near misses. At least twice, U.S. forces raided houses where they believed they missed Saddam by less than 24 hours.
Part of the problem you have when you're getting real-world intelligence or time-sensitive intelligence is you have to act on it in a short period of time. Intelligence is not permanent. It's perishable.
Near the end of the hunt, intelligence sources believed they were so close to Saddam that they were forcing him to change locations every 2 to 3 hours.
And the more that he is on the move, then that only increases the chances of him being captured.
On December 13, 2003, all the hard work finally paid off. A 600-man force composed of troops from the 4th Infantry Division and Special Operations Forces found a bedraggled Saddam inside a spider hole on a farm only miles from Tikrit, his hometown.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. It is certainly a shocking come down for the man who built palaces like this, who traveled in armored Mercedes and who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from his people. It was a real come down and a real fitting end.
With the successful capture of Saddam, only now can the behind-the-scenes details of the intense 8-month hunt for him be revealed. Tracking down Saddam begins on the afternoon of March 19, 2003, just hours before the U.S. imposed deadline for him to give up power. The CIA receives a jaw-dropping message over its classified communications network. An Iraqi official has turned on Saddam, and U.S. intelligence sources have an exact fix on where he and at least one of his sons will be that night.
There's only a select few people around Saddam Hussein that know his whereabouts. So what that indicates is the Americans have managed to penetrate one of the hardest to penetrate security units in Iraq.
In Washington, President George W. Bush huddles with his top advisors, weighing his options. If they move fast enough, the military could decapitate the regime before the first tank even rolls into Iraq. Half a world away at the Combined Air Operations Center in Saudi Arabia, Major Clint Highnote, the liaison officer for F-117 stealth fighter pilots, gets the first indication that something big is up.
I walked in, I looked at the computer screen, and the #1 target said possible location Saddam.
Moments later, the head of Air Command lays it on the line for his men, saying, "We owe the president an answer. Can we do this mission? And if so, what is the risk?"
I said, "Sir, we can do this, but I think the risk is going to be pretty high."
There are only 4 hours until daylight. The fighter pilots will be at risk without the cover of darkness, as Iraqi air defenses have yet to be tested. Major Highnote relays the orders over a secure phone line to the F-117 pilots at the U.S. Air Base in Qatar. Lieutenant Colonel David Toomey is one of 2 pilots who will carry out the top-secret mission.
We got notified, I think, around 1:30 in the morning, and we had bombs on target 4 hours later.
The pilots load their EGBU-27 bunker-busting bombs and take off for Baghdad. Meanwhile, the Navy launches 3 dozen Tomahawk missiles from warships in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. Just before dawn, they take out 3 buildings on the surface. Moments later, The F-117 zero in on what they believe to be the underground bunker where Saddam is sleeping.
At about 05:30, we came across a target, one in from the west, one in from the east. The target was along a river, I believe they call it the Dora Farms, and we dropped 4 2,000-pound weapons on this underground bunker at 5:30 in the morning.
We were watching Sky News of Britain, and they were the first to say, there's been a big explosion in southern Baghdad. And that's how we knew that they had made it through and gotten their bombs off.
But did they get Saddam? Part of the answer comes from the National Security Agency, or the NSA, seen in this exclusive behind-the-scenes video. The NSA has a secret, sophisticated computer software system called Echelon that helps filter millions of phone calls worldwide. An agent can punch in the word Saddam, and Echelon will present all the communications with the word Saddam in them. It's so secret, no one inside the government will acknowledge it exists. The morning of the strike on Saddam's bunker, Echelon pinpoints frantic calls from medical assistants there. Someone has been hit, but no one knows if Saddam is the victim. A bodyguard of Uday Hussein would later claim that Saddam and his 2 sons were staying in a safe house on the other side of Baghdad that night. And further investigation on the site reveals there isn't even an underground bunker there. The intelligence was flawed.
You know, at the end of the day, he's still alive out there walking around, and we didn't get him.
On April 7th, the 20th day of the war, the U.S. military believes it has another very good shot at getting the Iraqi dictator. An Iraqi informant tells a U.S. operative on the ground that Saddam will be in a particular building in the Mansour district of Baghdad. Within hours, a B-1 bomber drops 4 satellite-guided 2,000-pound JDAM bombs on the target. 9 people are killed, 13 others wounded. But an exhaustive search of the site turns up no evidence of Saddam or his sons. Saddam had escaped.
He has a certain animal cunning, there's no doubt about it. He has survived a number of assassination attempts.
One of Uday's bodyguards later reveals that the bombs missed their mark by just 10 minutes. Saddam apparently suspected there was an informant in his camp. He requested a meeting with the informant in that building in the Mansour district. Saddam arrived. Then he left almost immediately by the back door. He outfoxed the U.S. forces, and according to the bodyguard, the informant was soon executed. The U.S. steps up the pressure, offering a $25 million reward for information leading to the capture or killing of Saddam. $15 million for each of the sons. In mid-June 2003, a local informant in Tikrit, Saddam's hometown, tips off Task Force 20 about a hideout where someone big is staying. In a nighttime raid, U.S. forces storm the house and realize they've nabbed the ace of diamonds, number 4 in the deck of most wanted Iraqis. Abid Hamid Mahmoud is Saddam's trusted personal secretary and confidant. Task Force 20 searches Mahmoud's hideout for intelligence that might lead them to Saddam. They find a satellite phone. A number stored in its memory leads them to another phone in the Iraqi desert. On the morning of June 18, 2003, President Bush is reportedly presented with solid intelligence that a convoy, including Saddam and his sons, is heading for the Syrian border. Initial clues may come from intercepts of calls made on that phone in the desert. Task Force 20 is waiting at the border.
All of this came, I presume, from signals intelligence, because I'm not aware of any other source that could have provided this information in such a rapid fashion, which would allow the Task Force 20 commandos to react as quickly as they did.
At about 8:30 that Wednesday evening, a convoy driving at high speed approaches. Several SUVs split off and race across the Iraqi border into Syria. The details of what happens next are murky, but these photos tell some of the story. By some accounts, for the next 24 hours, there is a massive manhunt along a 50-mile stretch of remote desert. Apache and Black Hawk helicopters fill the skies, while Bradley fighting vehicles race across the sand. Eventually, Kiowa attack helicopters and AC-130 gunships join the operation, attacking 2 other groups of vehicles heading into Syria. A gas station is apparently hit, causing huge explosions that light up the sky. Details of the operation are never officially released by the Pentagon.
We strafed and bombed the convoys in question. We killed a significant number of people. The only question is, did we, in the attack on these convoys, did we kill innocent Iraqis, or did we kill members of the Ba'ath Party or other Saddam loyalists?
In fact, the operation ended up carrying into Syria about 25 miles and killing about 80 Syrian military and police troops and capturing 20 Iraqis connected with this convoy who turned out to be smugglers of various kinds and had to be released.
Some U.S. military and diplomatic officials call the operation a fiasco, questioning how American forces could have crossed the border, violating Syria's sovereignty. And once again, there are no traces of Saddam or his sons. 3 strikes, based on what is believed to be credible intelligence, fail. The most powerful military force in the world, with the most sophisticated intelligence, will need something else to find Saddam Hussein. A little luck. It is now July 2003, 4 months into the war, with 150,000 U.S. troops occupying Iraq. Saddam Hussein, the ace of spades, is still managing to evade capture or death.
Most likely, rather than good intelligence or investigative work, if Saddam is caught or killed, it'll be on the basis of some individual walking in and providing us with a tip-off as to where he is.
That's exactly what would lead to the demise of high-value targets number 2 and number 3, Uday and Qusay Hussein. On the evening of July 21st, an Iraqi walks into a U.S. military field office in the northern city of Mosul. The man informs officials that he knows where they can find Saddam's reviled sons.
The home where Uday and Qusay were holed up, along with 2 other individuals, was in the home of a cousin of Saddam Hussein.
The very next morning, Task Force 20 and elements of the 101st Airborne Division come calling on the villa in an affluent neighborhood in northern Mosul. An interpreter using a bullhorn orders the occupants to come out.
They were not going to risk U.S. Special Forces lives by having them storm the house and shoot their way in. They were going to try to see if they could talk them out.
There is no response, so an assault force enters the villa. U.S. troops are immediately met with gunfire. 4 soldiers are wounded.
They fought pretty hard. They had a lot of ammunition. They had some AK-47s. The building's very solid.
4 attempts to storm the villa meet with intense gunfire from the 2nd floor. Reinforcements are called in. 200 soldiers and Kiowa helicopter gunships fire anti-tank tow missiles into each window of the house.
The fact that the reports that they put as many as 10 tow missiles into it, that's a lot of firepower going into a building.
When the dust settles after a fierce 6-hour battle, there are 4 dead inside. Uday, Qusay, 1 bodyguard, and Qusay's 14-year-old son, Mustafa. The boy apparently survives the missile attacks and fires upon entering troops before he is finally shot and killed. Some Iraqis celebrate news of the deaths of Saddam's sons, but many others are skeptical, distrusting of anything the Americans tell them. The Pentagon decides to release photos of their bloodied and disfigured bodies as proof. It is apparent both men have grown thick black beards, possibly in an attempt to disguise themselves. Still, many Iraqis remain unconvinced.
My first opinion was, I couldn't accept this.
The Americans, they show what's good for them, and they hide what's bad for them.
The next day, the Pentagon invites journalists to view the remains of Uday and Qusay, now cleaned up, to look more like themselves. Meanwhile, Task Force 20 is back at the Mosul villa, sifting through the rubble for intelligence that might lead them to the prize. It turns out Uday and Qusay had been holed up with their distant cousin for more than 3 weeks.
You're going to look for any exploitable intelligence, cell phones, any kind of paper trail, any kind of notebooks to find out who they've been calling, if they've been writing names down. You want to try to build a profile of what their activities have been, where they've been, who they've been talking to.
It is widely believed that the owner of the house is also the informant. He collects the $30 million reward for ratting out his relatives. He and his family will be relocated to America. He can even become a citizen, all courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer. The hope is other Iraqis will follow his lead and give up Saddam.
When the Iraqi came forward and provided us with the information about where Uday and Qusay were, it was a fortuitous piece of luck.
But when it comes to finding Saddam, luck seems to be as elusive as the man himself. In the summer of 2003, theories abound as to where he is and where he has been since the start of the war.
There could be a number of tricks up his sleeve. He's been very wily and very clever.
According to some U.S. and Middle Eastern intelligence sources, Saddam leaves Baghdad for Syria about 1 week after the first strike against him. They believe he spends 10 to 12 days in the town of Latakia until the Syrians, fearing discovery and reprisals by the Americans, kick him out.
I think if the Syrian government in particular had had their hands on him, they would have hung on to him and probably sold him to us for some really high stakes.
Those same intelligence sources say when Saddam leaves Syria, he flies to Minsk, Belarus, a theory bolstered by the fact that his personal secretary is captured with dozens of blank Belarusian passports and several $1 million on him. From Minsk, these sources say, Saddam later flies to Libya, but stays only briefly.
Going to Belarus or to Libya, you know, I find that to be really fanciful. I just don't think that's likely to be true. He wouldn't trust himself to people like that.
According to one of Uday's former bodyguards, Saddam never left Iraq. As coalition bombs pummeled Baghdad in March, Saddam stayed put in safe houses. In April, as tanks rolled into Baghdad, he made a surprise television appearance. In the videotape, he's seen surrounded by a throng of supporters. As Baghdad fell around him, Saddam apparently hid in plain sight, showing up at a mosque for Friday prayers just 2 days after coalition forces took Baghdad. And in the ultimate show of hubris, he drove through the streets of Mansour in unmarked cars right past a convoy of U.S. troops and tanks.
Wouldn't surprise me if Saddam just took a couple of his bodyguard, hopped into, let's say, a Toyota Land Cruiser and just started driving around Iraq inconspicuously.
By mid-April, Saddam may believe it's time to get out of Baghdad and head for friendlier territory in Iraq. But how can he avoid detection when the city is crawling with U.S. soldiers and Marines?
I think just get in a car and drive. You send people ahead, you have radio communications, you find out if there are checkpoints. When you see checkpoints, you can radio back to somebody or call on the cell phone. Now that does potentially compromise him.
Given that he places an emphasis on personal survival, he moves in a mobile command vehicle. There are long periods of time where he doesn't talk, and it's a very, very difficult intelligence problem.
But if in July 2003, the hunt for Saddam Hussein is proving next to impossible, so is the search for America's other archenemy, Osama bin Laden. While the intensive hunt for Saddam ultimately proved successful, the search for Osama bin Laden is proving to be much more frustrating. Like Saddam Hussein, he has a $25 million bounty on his head, yet he remains at large. To date, neither human nor electronic intelligence is effective in capturing the world's most infamous terrorist.
We simply have failed in everything we have done to get, neutralize, or otherwise take Osama bin Laden out of the picture.
Osama bin Laden's terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda, has deep roots in Afghanistan. His ties to this bleak, militantly Muslim land date to the early 1980s when he took part in the Afghan-Soviet War. It is a place he knows like the back of his hand. It is here that he establishes camps to train thousands of men for his terrorist army. And the Saudi-born millionaire stays in contact with his al-Qaeda operatives around the world.
It was very possible to find out what he was doing on the internet and on with fax machines and with cell phones and all this kind of stuff.
The National Security Agency starts tracking bin Laden's activities in the early 1990s. Its most potent surveillance weapon is the top-secret software program called Echelon. In 1996, Echelon pins down bin Laden's telephone number in Afghanistan.
He was using a service known as Inmarsat, which is a satellite system used by ships at sea and explorers in remote areas. And, he would use that phone, and NSA would listen right in.
But in August of 1998, Echelon fails to detect any signals that al-Qaeda plans to car bomb 2 U.S. embassies in Africa. 2 weeks later, there is an intercept from bin Laden's phone that indicates he is going to a camp in Afghanistan for a meeting. The U.S. responds to this news with cruise missiles, but bin Laden is gone an hour before the camp is destroyed. In the latter half of 1998, bin Laden discovers that U.S. intelligence has been eavesdropping on him, and he stops using his phone.
His lieutenants continued to use the phone, but he stopped using it, which made it very difficult for us to know what it was he was doing. And of course, he hindered our ability to track his movements and find him.
And that lack of information proves deadly. U.S. intelligence has no clear advance warning of the horrors of September 11th. After these attacks, President George W. Bush makes the hunt for Osama bin Laden his top priority.
I want justice. And there's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, "Wanted, dead or alive."
In October of 2001, the president orders U.S. troops into Afghanistan. Their task is to overthrow the extremist Taliban regime that harbors al-Qaeda and shut down the terrorist bases. The main goal is finding Osama bin Laden. There is great confidence that he will be taken quickly. A month into the war, a Predator spy plane zeroes in on a high-level al-Qaeda meeting outside Kabul. U.S. intelligence is certain bin Laden is there. A U.S. airstrike on the site kills Mohammed Atef, al-Qaeda's military chief, but bin Laden gets away. Then, in December 2002, American intelligence picks up bin Laden's trail in eastern Afghanistan.
And one of the people associated with him was using a satellite phone or cell phone, and the U.S. was monitoring that, and that's why they were closing in on bin Laden at that point up in Tora Bora.
The forbidding White Mountains of Tora Bora form a natural border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Bin Laden and al-Qaeda troops are believed hiding within its sprawling complex of caves.
We don't know.
In mid-December, the U.S. sends a makeshift army of Afghan mercenaries along with some American special forces to get bin Laden. But as they advance on the al-Qaeda stronghold, they meet fierce resistance. The Afghans refuse to move forward. The hunt for bin Laden is stalled. The U.S. calls in an airstrike, and American B-52s pound the southern Afghan side of Tora Bora with huge bombs. But unwilling to anger Pakistan, a U.S. ally, they leave the Pakistani side of Tora Bora untouched. This leaves a wide open escape route for bin Laden, and he slips away.
He just got to be very lucky. We didn't have enough troops and couldn't close the encirclement around him.
2 weeks after the initial assault on Tora Bora, additional U.S. ground forces arrive for the final push. All they find now are abandoned caves with tons of supplies and a small group of al-Qaeda and Taliban. The initial optimism of finding bin Laden fades with each day.
Indicators were there
And now indicators are not there, so maybe he still is there, maybe he was killed, or maybe he's left.
It is now likely that bin Laden and many of his al-Qaeda are in the tribal area of northwest Pakistan ruled by Pashtun chiefs. This fundamentalist Muslim enclave has its own dialect and ancient customs. Outsiders are not welcome. And although bin Laden and his top aides have multi-million-dollar bounties on their heads, the al-Qaeda fugitives are now surrounded by Islamic zealots who have little use for reward money.
To give him up in order to make their own lives easier is something which they would think was in fact threatening to the salvation of their souls.
The U.S. has few options in going after bin Laden in this region. Pakistan doesn't want American troops on its soil. And there are also elements within Pakistan's intelligence service that remain friendly to the Taliban and sympathetic to bin Laden and his cause. Former CIA officer Larry Johnson has talked to sources knowledgeable about the situation on the ground in Pakistan.
I've heard very clearly that elements of the Pakistani intelligence service are protecting him. He's being sheltered.
In 2003, the hunt for bin Laden enters its second year, and the trail remains cold. Month by month, fewer and fewer resources are being put into bin Laden as the U.S. focuses on Iraq and Saddam Hussein. On March 20th, 2003, the war in Iraq begins, and for all intents and purposes, the hunt for bin Laden ends. And despite the fall of Baghdad and the capture of Saddam Hussein, there is still no resolution to American involvement in Iraq.
The war in Iraq has diverted not only political attention, but it's diverted intelligence resources, it's diverted military forces. The notion that we can do a lot of things well at the same time is simply not true.
In fact, the U.S. disbands Task Force 11, the special ops group formed to find bin Laden, to fold its elements into Task Force 20.
So all the effort devoted to going after Saddam Hussein is effort that goes away from finding and locating the al-Qaeda terrorists.
Today in Afghanistan, a reduced presence of coalition troops tries to police a vast and hostile territory. Attacks by resurgent Taliban forces are increasing, and there are rumors that they are reinforced by al-Qaeda from Pakistan. And so far, there is still no sign of Osama bin Laden.
The failure to find bin Laden is, to me, represents a much more serious threat to the United States and to its people. No matter how terrible Saddam was, he wasn't a direct threat to us. But there's no doubt that bin Laden was a clear, direct threat to us, and we've so far let him off the hook.
July 2003. After months of failed hits and bad tips, the search for Saddam Hussein, the #1 target and the biggest manhunt in history, gains new momentum. Following the deaths of his sons in a fierce battle with U.S. forces, there is a significant increase in human intelligence as more and more Iraqis come forward with information.
I think it becomes imperative, and it's well understood by U.S. force commanders in Iraq, that we have to find the man. Either we capture him or we kill him. Or if he's already dead, we have to find the body.
Still, in the summer of 2003, putting Saddam in the crosshairs is proving to be extremely difficult. He has an entire arsenal of survival techniques at his disposal, including about a half-dozen lookalikes, some of them surgically altered to better resemble him.
There have been concerns as to whether the person who would surrender would in fact be Saddam Hussein, whether it would be a double. The doubles, at least I'm under the impression, they're very good doubles.
He maybe has some trick up his sleeve by convincing us for a time that one of his doubles is really him, and he goes one way and somebody else goes another.
And the real Saddam may no longer look the same. U.S. intelligence sources believe he might change his appearance to elude capture. In August 2003, the CIA digitally alters several photos of him and distributes them to U.S. troops and Task Force 20, the secretive special ops unit leading the hunt. The photos show Saddam with a beard, Saddam dressed as a Bedouin, Saddam with silver hair looking like a kindly old uncle, Saddam with no mustache. By September, he could be underground. He has an elaborate system of bunkers and tunnels. U.S. intelligence identified more than 24 of these installations during the first Gulf War in 1991. But they believe there may be more now, and some might be located under hospitals or mosques, sites not likely to be targets of American bombs. U.S. forces occupying Iraq search for maps or blueprints of the new bunkers and tunnels, and the engineers who designed them, but they're unlikely to find them.
When Saddam realizes that you're an engineer and you know too much about where he could hide, he's going to have you killed.
Not fearing reprisals from Saddam, the German engineers who designed one of the underground fortresses revealed the blueprints. This 20,000 square foot bunker was built under one of Saddam's palaces at a cost of $90 million. It has luxurious bedrooms and is stocked with enough food and water to last a year. And with giant shock absorbers, it's designed to withstand multiple bomb blasts and missile strikes.
There are some very, very hardened, deep underground facilities that have 20 or more feet, maybe 100 feet in some cases, of dirt, and then 6 to 20 feet of reinforced concrete, and then prefabricated steel.
Saddam's bunkers are narrow but very deep. Some burrow as much as 300 feet underground.
They're almost impervious to anything but nuclear attack or other ways of getting at them, like sealing them off in some way with special operations.
Some of them may be connected by tunnels, allowing him to move from one underground location to another.
One of the things that makes these underground structures difficult is the labyrinth network of them, and with blast doors in between. So even if you penetrate down into one compartment, say, and destroy that, then the steel doors may contain the effects of the blast. If you're on the other side, you're a quarter-mile away, you're perfectly safe.
But many feel Saddam isn't risking an air assault on one of his bunkers. U.S. officials believe Saddam planned his escape months in advance, identifying safe houses and sending ahead money and supplies to his most trusted supporters. By the summer of 2003, he is likely moving from one house to the next, hiding out in private homes.
I heard stories from family friends in Baghdad and so forth that during the '91 Gulf War that he would just show up on your doorsteps and knock and say, "Do you mind if I stay with you?" And even I remember jokes among family friends and so forth saying, we have to keep the house clean. There's most likely Saddam will be coming over.
He's staying in somebody's house. That's the most likely thing. It's obvious that at least passively, a large number of people are protecting him. Otherwise, we'd have him by now.
Well, I'm sure that's the case. This is part of his effort to mix with private citizens and to keep the intelligence services guessing as to where he's going to be and who he's going to be with. I think that that's all part of his survival game.
During the long summer of 2003, Saddam manages to confound U.S. military efforts to gather electronic intercepts on phone calls, faxes, two-way radio conversations, emails, even ATM transactions and electronic transfers of money.
They're very good at communication security, and they're not using telephones or walkie-talkies, things like this. They're using couriers and personal messengers and things like that to communicate.
With Saddam avoiding his bunkers and avoiding his phones, the most likely way to nab him will be through a tip.
The key is finding folks in the inner circle who'll give him up. And so far, what's the good news with Uday and Qusay? It appears the money was enough of an incentive to cause an inner circle person to dime him out.
I have very little doubt that there will people be willing, in view of his brutal torture of people and the families who harbor these deep resentments, who'll be willing to turn him in.
By early August 2003, U.S. forces are accelerating their drive to flush Saddam out. Daily, they are capturing important members of his former regime, and with the deaths of his sons, his inner circle is likely getting smaller and smaller. There's a growing confidence among American officials that Saddam Hussein's days are numbered.
He's essentially a man hiding in the rubble of his country, and with a price on his head, with a large and effective army searching for him, a joint task force with all kinds of really effective commandos and intelligence people searching for him every day. I'd bet quite a lot of my own money on the fact that we'd get him.
By the fall of 2003, Saddam Hussein is still at large, having eluded all attempts to capture him. In the wake of the failure to find Saddam, the U.S. creates a new task force, 121. Headed by Special Operations, it includes conventional Army forces as well as intelligence units from the CIA.
This was the first time you brought them together under a chain of command where the CIA itself was in a position to support this particular military unit that was carrying out these operations, where you could get intelligence that was real-time, that was sensitive, that had to be acted upon quickly, and you had the forces that were able to respond to that direction and move quickly.
With an organization on the ground capable of exploiting intelligence with lightning speed, Task Force 121 steps up its efforts to find more people with tribal ties to Saddam, people who might be protecting him. Even as Secretary Rumsfeld visits Iraq in early December, the net is closing in on Saddam. On Friday, December 12th, a member of Saddam's clan is caught in Baghdad.
There was something about his background that drew our initial interest in him. We were very much interested in talking to that individual.
U.S. officials refuse to reveal his identity. Under interrogation, the man agrees to tell them where Saddam is hiding. The task force strikes quickly.
This operation was carried out within a 10-hour period, from the time of questioning him, developing the information, and then acting upon it.
The tip leads them to the town of Adwar and to an area with 2 farmhouses, only miles from Tikrit. It is a place the 4th ID has investigated before. In the mission codenamed Red Dawn, 600 troops in the 4th ID and Special Operations Forces from Task Force 121 descend on the farmhouses under cover of darkness.
The moon had not risen. As good fortune would have it, the electricity went out in the town of Adwar, which further masked our approach.
As troops from the 4th ID secure the area, Special Operations Forces search for Saddam. The informant accompanies them.
He was able to describe that there was an underground hiding place.
At first, there is some confusion.
Forces went to the wrong house, then they finally focused in on the correct house, and then they began a methodical search.
At 8:26 that night, they find a crack in the ground under a lean-to next to a mud hut. When the soldiers examine the crack, they uncover a hidden door to what turns out to be a hole 6 feet deep.
It was very difficult to detect, even with somebody who knew generally where it was supposed to be located.
They pulled back a small piece of carpet, again found a small block of styrofoam that was covered with some earth, removed that, and they clearly saw a man down there.
We were prepared for direct fire contact, but did not have it.
There was some initial resistance. It appears he was clubbed on the side of the head.
Although Saddam is armed with a pistol, he offers no further resistance.
He was pulled out. He said, I am Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq, and I'm willing to negotiate.
The hole he has been hiding in has only an air pipe and fan to provide ventilation. There is no plumbing. The crawl space is approximately 8 feet long, enough for one person to lie flat. Nearby is a squalid 2-room hut where Saddam had been staying. In the bedroom, the troops find new underwear, slippers, and shampoo. Fruit and chocolate bars litter the filthy makeshift kitchen. In the hut, the troops recover 2 AK-47s, as well as $750,000 in $100 bills, money Saddam has been using to buy his security in his 8 months on the run. 2 other men trying to flee the scene are also arrested. Contrary to some reports, they were not bodyguards. One was his cook, the other was a relative of the cook.
He knows how to stay alive, and he knows that there's a time to adopt a fairly low profile. So he wasn't traveling with this great retinue.
His captors take Saddam by helicopter, first to Tikrit, then to an undisclosed location believed to be the detention center at Baghdad Airport. A tattoo on his hand and old scars help identify him, as do former aides like Tariq Aziz, who is also in custody there. As another way of confirming his identity, the head of the Coalition Provisional Authority, Paul Bremer, invites 4 former opponents of Saddam, who are now members of the Iraqi Governing Council, to meet with him.
It was important for the Iraqi Governing Council to lay eyes on him and to confirm that this indeed was Saddam Hussein, which they did.
I found him very defiant, very unrepentant. He felt absolutely no remorse towards the crimes he has committed against the Iraqi people. Very unapologetic.
In the United States, it is now Saturday afternoon, Washington time. Secretary Rumsfeld calls President Bush.
I said that the first reports are almost always wrong, and I don't want him to take this aboard as a fact, but that it appears that we have Saddam Hussein in custody. And he said, well, if you're cautioning me on first reports, it must be good news, and it is good news, and that's terrific.
5 o'clock the next morning, President Bush is informed that DNA tests have positively confirmed Saddam's identity. Although the U.S. has long maintained that it has samples of Saddam's DNA on file, the killings of his sons in July gave them another opportunity to collect DNA material.
They pulled it from the bodies of Uday and Qusay, and I think that was used as the ultimate match.
With the DNA results in, Ambassador Paul Bremer announces the news at a press conference in Baghdad.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
He shows a 30-second clip from what is a 1-hour videotape of an American doctor giving Saddam a complete physical after his arrest. In the footage, the doctor is seen examining the side of Saddam's head. According to former CIA official Larry Johnson, that's where Saddam was clubbed during his capture.
He felt that there had been some damage, and the doctor checked him out. Was not checking for lice, was checking to see if there had been any kind of cut or bruise to the side of his head.
Saddam looked so weak, exhausted. It was a bad hair day for him, to be sure, just scruffy looking, and this was not the image that had been so important for his leadership following.
The news of his capture is immediately greeted with spontaneous celebrations in the streets of Baghdad. In the days that follow, information found in documents seized at the scene of Saddam's capture lead to more arrests.
They've gone out and rolled up the support network that was helping protect and hide him. And some of that support network, apparently, I think it's becoming clear, were involved with helping plan and conduct attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq.
Now, with Saddam in custody, U.S. officials can look back at some of their assumptions of his life on the run. As many had predicted, he relied on a network of family and close supporters to keep himself alive. He did not leave the country to go to Syria, Belarus, or Libya, as some had believed.
Saddam was going to stay close to home, around friends and family that he knew he could trust. He knew that just were obligated to help him by virtue of the bloodlines.
Except for the long hair and beard, the Saddam who was caught looked exactly like the Saddam that everyone knew. He had not changed his appearance, either through plastic surgery or disguise, as some intelligence sources had predicted.
You can go back now to those sources of information and know that those sources didn't know what they were talking about.
In the end, as most predicted, it was a tip that led to Saddam's capture. But since the informant was a prisoner who revealed the information under interrogation, he is not eligible for the $25 million reward, but the U.S. offers to protect his family. Saddam has now been officially designated as a POW. Eventually, he will be turned over to the Iraqis to stand trial for his crimes against the Iraqi people.
Under the tribunal law that they have adopted, he will, like everybody, have a right to defense and counsel, and the trials will be open in public, and they will meet international standards.
The hunt for Saddam is over, but here in the mountainous region of eastern Afghanistan, U.S. officials believe Osama bin Laden is hiding, protected by the fiercely independent Pashtun peoples who live there. The hunt for him has slowed to a crawl.
There's been no real significant progress in finding Osama bin Laden, and that goes down to one very fundamental flaw. We've not made it a priority.
But there's no reason to believe that the blueprint laid down in the hunt for Saddam, a dedicated task force led by special operations units, will be any less successful once applied to tracking down Osama.
ready for 1,000 years of unreal human behavior. They brought emperors to their knees. They laid siege to cities and ransacked entire nations. The Goths, the Huns, the Vikings, the Mongols. The barbarians are coming. Next, as only the History Channel can bring you.